Welcome to the MLB Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by thelines.com, coming to you from the West Coast. Josh Lander, joined by my guys Mo Nawara in the Midwest, and we've got Nate Weitzer on the East Coast. And we are running into game ones here in this opening series of the MLB playoffs. We are going to be bringing you these videos during the week of these MLB playoffs, so make sure you are liked and subscribed to that page. Want to continue to follow along with us. We also want you to head to thelines.com. Going to continue to have all that great written content on thelines.com for you guys all fall long, heading into the winter as well. Also want you to use that great odds finder tool. Make sure you are shopping those lines to the best of your ability during this MLB postseason. Let's go ahead and kick things off, guys, with the Cleveland's series against Tampa Bay. We have some series odds here, minus 130 for Cleveland to take this down. Tampa Bay plus 110. In the game one here, we do have a battle of the Shanes. Bieber taking on McClanahan for the Rays. Minus 122 for Cleveland in this game one. Tampa is plus 104 there on the money line. Nate, kick us off in game one and in this series. What are you looking at in this game one battle of the Shanes as well as this series overall?
The biggest thing is the Rays' home road splits, which are abysmal this year, 35 and 46 on the road. Obviously much, much better at home. You would think maybe that turns around in the playoffs. Well, not recently. They've lost 6 of their 7 last roadies on the playoffs. And they ended the season with 9 straight road games, lost 7 of those, including 2 in Cleveland. That being said, folks, I like Tampa in game one. I think based on the matchup, it's wrong team favored here. I think there's too much stock going into these splits, which are over a monstrous sample size, of course. And Shane McClanahan is the best pitcher on the road that they can throw. And they've been lining this up for a while. His ERA on the road was about 2.75 whip. And he's facing a Guardians lineup that's straight up bad against lefties. They're 27th on the year in WOBA, weighted runs created plus. Strangely, in the second half, they have the 3rd highest chase rate and the lowest K rate. So I don't know if that spells, some regression in terms of getting strike 3. And when you got a guy like McClanahan that can blow it by him, I think he will have a strong outing. I think the Rays have been lining this up for a while. And there's just a certain, go against the grain when it comes to sports where you say like, oh, they've lost 7 road games in a row. Something's going to give. Shane Bieber, has been steady recently, but I'm not particularly scared of him as the Guardians ace. I kind of like the Guardians to come back and still win the next 2. So we'll see what the odds are after this point. Right now, it would be plus 220 for them to win to 2-1 in this series. But Mo kind of talked me into the Rays as the better futures play here. We were looking at underdogs in the AL because not that high on any of the favorites. So it'll be interesting to see how they look. But I think the Rays can get this first game and then put this series to 3, which as you look at the series price, it's pretty much even money for it to go 3, regardless of who wins. And I think the way these teams are built, they play a lot of close games, low scoring games. I think it will go 3 games.
Yeah, completely agree. I also like the Rays game one. It's just like you said, McClanahan, one of the best pitchers in baseball, and facing a team that has been putrid hitting lefties. I think it's real because I think it profiles as a team that's not going to hit lefties well. When I look at this lineup, first of all, I want to say that shockingly, I mean, it's crazy to even say this like about a playoff team, but it's real. Cleveland is the only playoff team that has a below average offense and a below average starting pitching staff. I don't understand how you can make the playoffs in that situation. They have a good defense in bullpen. They're not like overwhelming. This is pretty crazy to me. So honestly, I've been underrating Cleveland all year, I guess, because I really believed in the Twins and the Cleveland cost me a lot of money, but I still don't believe in Cleveland. And I just think the Rays, I'm seeing series prices. If you can get around plus 110, I think it's fine to bet Tampa Bay. It's close for me whether I'm willing to play it on a series price. I do like them game one. I saw a plus 108. I pulled the trigger on that today. I think the Rays offense is honestly probably underrated as well. They didn't have Wander Franco for a lot of the year. Generally just a lot of injuries overall. So I think it's probably underselling them where they're at. They're only slightly above Cleveland on offense. They are missing Brandon Lau. That's pretty big. I think he probably projects to be their best or second best hitter. But I still think this is a better team than Cleveland. And like I said, the Cleveland profiles as a team that hits lefties poorly, with the lineup they have, which is, Steven Kwan leading off. He's a lefty. Jose Ramirez, he's switched, but he hits better in his career by about 10 WRC plus. He's better batting from the left side. Josh Naylor is basically a platoon bat. And then they even have another platoon bat with Will Brennan. It's just not a team I'm that excited about facing lefties for sure. And like I said, Tyler Glasnow pitching. I think they have two pitchers that are better than anybody Cleveland is going to throw out there, or at least Glasnow is very close to Bieber. It gets a little hairy if it goes to game 3. I do think in that case, Cleveland probably should be small favorites. But I do like the Rays in game 1, and I don't hate a series bet, although I don't think I'm going to play it.
Yeah, I understand that. And I mean, if you're looking at Bieber's only start in the playoffs, getting shellacked a few years ago against the Yanks, not a great history for him. Obviously only a second start, but I do agree with a lot of what you're saying here, preferring the Rays, especially at that price. So let's move on to the second series here, guys. And we're talking about the Phillies taking on the St. Louis Cardinals. Minus 135 for the Cards on the series price there, plus 115 for the Phils. Looking at game 1, we've actually got it pretty even here, minus 108 for both of these squads on the money line. The ageless Adam Wainwright taking on Zach Wheeler, the former Met there. As you list here, Nate, Waino is 40 years old. I think there's probably a lot to like about this Phillies team with that lineup as well, taking on this Cards team. I would just say ahead of time, what I would struggle with if I was a Cards fan is what my bullpen is going to do. If Waino is unable to continue pitching into deep into games in the playoffs after more than 190 innings as a 40-year-old, now you're talking about some guys who are going to tee off on some pretty weak bullpen pitching this year for the Cards. So I guess that would be my main reason for thinking that maybe this series is also mispriced. What say you?
Well, it's interesting. You have a dead even line, and then you have one team as underdogs for the series pretty considerably because it's a 3-game series. So, I mean, the Phils can come back with Aaron Nola in game 2, and it could be over if they win this first one. So I think there is some value there. We talked about in the futures episode, the Phillies having the most value as a futures bet, not necessarily the most likely team to go deep because we don't trust their bullpen that much. But I definitely think they can get through this series. St. Louis's offense has been incredible recently, but Zach Wheeler is a tough matchup for them. I mean, he has 2 scoreless starts against them this season, really just dominated all the bad NL Central teams when he got those starts 6 times this year. And Wainwright, I mean, he's got his long postseason track record, but yeah, at this point, he's 40. He's pitched almost 200 innings. I have a hard time trusting him to just go out there and silence the Phils, who are just such a streaky team. And when you get the momentum of making a late run to make the playoffs, I think there's a certain possibility that they carry that over into this and at least get game 1. And if you get game 1, then obviously you should have a huge advantage to win one of the next 2.
So this series is actually really interesting, mainly because I don't know what the Cardinals are going to do with their starting pitching. I'm not seeing Wainwright going, so I'm not seeing anything set in stone actually at all. This is the only game where ESPN doesn't have a starter listed. Fangraphs thinks it's going to be Miles Michaelis. So obviously it probably would be Wainwright if he was healthy, but I'm seeing that he has, quote, a dead arm. That sounds bad. I don't know what they're going to do in game 3, assuming Waino can't go. I guess it's going to be Quintana or Flaherty, and I'm guessing it's going to be Jordan Montgomery in game 2. That's just my best guess when I'm trying to project out this series. It seems like a lot of stuff is in flux with the Cardinals. They also, I think, so Josh hit on something that I think is very, very key here, which is basically the Cardinals only have one reliever that I trust, even remotely, which is Ryan Helsley. I don't think I'd be excited to see any of the other guys in the game if I'm a Cardinals fan. And the thing about this one is even Ryan Helsley has, I guess, a jammed finger. I'm not sure if that's going to affect him at all, but It's really, really hard to trust a team that would have 0 healthy bullpen guys that you would trust. And this is by far and away the worst bullpen by strikeout minus walk rate. So I know people are not excited about the Phillies pen, but it's like a step above this pen, honestly. And I honestly, I don't believe in the Cardinals' full season offense number. I know that the sample size is huge, obviously, when we get to this point, but I just don't believe that this is a significantly better offense than the Phillies, which is basically what the numbers are telling me. Obviously, having Bryce Harper miss a good chunk of the season plays into that for sure, and he's back now. I guess this is a long-winded way of saying I like the Phillies quite a bit. Plus 115 is a price I'm seeing out there. I think it's too high by a decent amount. I think the Phillies should probably be about even money in this series. And honestly, the projections, I think, agree with me, man. I'm looking at the Fangraphs projections. They have the Phillies as 6% to win the World Series and the Cardinals at like 2%. I mean, they like the Phillies a lot more than the Cardinals. I think this series is basically a coin flip. So plus 115 seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, I can fully back that. I feel really good about the Phils in this series. Not only would I be totally scared of that Cardinals bullpen combined with pitchers who don't necessarily go deep enough in games for them. It's kind of the inverse for the Phillies. Yes, their bullpen is still a little bit less suspect, as you mentioned, than the Cards. But you got guys like Aaron Nola, who pitched basically, I believe he had the second most 7-inning plus pitched games this season, behind only Miami's Sandy Alcantara. So both of these guys, including Wheeler, now that he's fully back to health and form, are very capable of going 7+, 8 if they need it in the playoffs, to sort of cover up for that bad bullpen. So I think that's the advantage they specifically have. But let's move on to a series here that we're actually all really looking forward to. I think in Toronto and Seattle. I think what we're talking about here is Toronto and their offensive juggernaut of a lineup going to go ahead and really take on the magical Mariners right now and see if they can handle that. A team that's just playing really well all over the field, really, and doesn't necessarily do anything way better than everybody else, but does everything really well. So minus 170, though, for Toronto on this series line. Seattle, plus 140. I know there was some talk before the show amongst us about a potential sweep for the Jays as well. That would get you plus 180. Let's look at game one here as well. Minus 152 for Toronto, plus 126. You've got Manoah and Castillo on the mound there. Castillo for those Mariners. So Mo, go ahead and kick us off in this one. What are you looking at both in the series here and in this game one? I imagine game one's pretty easy to talk about if you're feeling pretty good about a series price already.
Yeah, I thought this one was maybe a hair underpriced, but it wasn't enough for me to pull the trigger on a bet. I do think that surprisingly enough, when you look at across the board, I guess it's surprising in the sense of like the Mariners looked like they were outperforming the Jays for a lot of the season. But honestly, the numbers say the Jays have better pitching, better defense, better offense. Really, the only place where the Mariners have a clear advantage is in their bullpen. It's not like the Jays have a bad pen. It was kind of middle of the pack, but the Mariners obviously have a tremendous bullpen. That sort of thing is very, very, very useful in the playoffs because those guys can soak up a few extra innings. I do worry about a Mariners offense that the numbers say are above average. I don't know if I believe in it, especially with Jesse Winker being out right now. I don't think he's going to come back for this series, it looks like, because I don't think it's possible because he just went on the IL a few days ago. I do wonder what happens if this goes to game 3, though, because I don't really know what the Jays have pitching-wise after Manoah and Gausman. I guess what I'm saying is I like the Jays to sweep. If you want to make a wager on the Jays, it seems too high to me, plus 180. I honestly thought this should be... I have the Jays as pretty strong favorites in the first 2 games. But if it goes to game 3, the Mariners have better depth in their starting pitching than the Jays do. My best guess is Jose Barrios would go. He's had an awful season, but I don't know who else they can really realistically throw out there, and they're paying him all that money. Other option is basically Ross Stripling. It's pretty dicey for the Jays if this goes to game 3. Now, I will say Robbie Ray, other option, struggled down the stretch, but I think that he can probably ramp his velocity back up to 94, 95 when he was down to like 93, which is a velocity he hasn't been good at. But if he just throws a shorter outing and like maybe piggybacks with George Kirby or I think it would be George Kirby, because I'm seeing Logan Gilbert projected in game 2. So I do think the Jays to sweep might be worth a look, but this is not a series I'm very excited about betting. I'm just going to hopefully sweat the Jays through for my future.
Yeah, tough series to forecast because of the lack of postseason experience on both sides. I feel like the Blue Jays organizationally and with George Springer, at least as a leader there, have a little bit more know what to expect in the postseason, and they do come in much hotter. I definitely like them in game 1 with Manoah, who's extremely steady, Castillo a bit more of a wild card. But as Mo goes through it, the Mariners have the advantage in starting pitching beyond that. So it is, at the same time, like, I just think this Blue Jays lineup is good enough to overcome, unless they're facing a true ace, to really overcome that matchup, to make guys work to get to that bullpen early. So I think, if you're going to bet them, I would rather take them to win the first 2 than to at minus 150 to win this one. But really, the angle we're looking at with all 3 of these, right? We're looking at a team that played in a much, much tougher division going up against a team that didn't. And that's why the projections are off, because if you play in a tougher division, you have a worse record. You might get seeded lower like the Phillies and the Rays. And I think if you took all 3 of those, you probably are going to be right on 2 of them at least, just based on the fact that those projections are off, but based on pure record. But they could be better teams and more prepared for these 3-game wars than the other teams that played in weaker divisions.
All great points, guys, and a fun series, but definitely the one with the fewer stars, if you will, on both sides of the ball comparatively, at least to this last series where we've got the Mets and the Pods full of big names that you have heard of. A couple of different lines, obviously, in the series here. We still have the Mets favored, and in game 1, we also have the Mets minus 154 with Scherzer on the mound, right? Taking on Yu Darvish, who's been good for the Pods this year, but obviously their strength lies in their lineup, right, and their ability to hit the ball with a couple of the guys. Obviously, it's been a bit underwhelming at times this year comparatively. I think it's interesting you bring up the point about that other series too, Mo, with the Mariners and the Blue Jays. It's interesting what perception does for you. It seems like the Blue Jays sort of underperformed compared to their expectations we had at the beginning of the season, whereas the Mariners just completely outperform. And I think with the Mets, they were a team that performed at the level that they hoped to this year, with a really, really improved offensive lineup, obviously, and then obviously we know about the pitching staff. But the Padres, I think they were a team, obviously, that also sort of underachieved with the same sort of expectations that the Mets had this season. And so you come in going, well, it feels like a Mets series. I will say I'm a bit nervous about the fact that the bats have gone a bit quiet for the Mets. I will say, the pitching, while it's been a little bit worse down the stretch, specifically the last 20 games, there were a few injuries to their 2 top starters there in Scherzer and DeGrom. So we'll see how they fare. Scherzer should be completely healthy for this one, which makes you feel pretty good about the Mets maybe in game 1 compared to Darvish. But, I will say, lastly, for the Pods, they were really good this season when they weren't playing the Dodgers. That was a huge issue for them. Obviously, they played them about 19 times, won 5 of those games. So that's a big reason for them not even being having a few more wins this season, specifically their struggles with the Doyers. But coming in against the Mets, Nate, go ahead and kick us off in this one. Anything you like in the series, and definitely want to know what you feel about that game 1 with such a high money line there from minus 154 for the Mets.
The Mets is a real psychological forecast here. Is how are they going to react to getting swept by the Braves and losing that division on the last few days of the season? I think with Max Scherzer on the mound, I do lean towards them rallying back. The guy is obviously a fantastic postseason pitcher. Yu Darvish, we know, doesn't have good postseason numbers. That's kind of skewed by 2 blowups against the Astros when they were cheating in the World Series. But at the same time, his best pitches are breaking balls, and the Mets have kind of hammered those since the second half. If you look at the entire sample of that, he did have success in 2 starts against these Mets, but 57 and 24 at home are the Metropolitans. Scherzer has a 1.67 ERA at home. I think it's understandable why they're minus 150 for this first game. And I think I want to look at them winning the first 2 because I think that's what they know they have to do to line up their pitching going forward. But I I think that minus 150 for this first game is a fair bet, rather than the Blue Jays, which seems a little bit more up in the air. I think you can definitely lean towards Scherzer as having the advantage here, and the Mets as trying to get back on the right foot after what happened to them at the end of the season.
Yeah, I like the Mets as well. This is my other wager series price that I have locked in. I took the Mets minus 175 at DraftKings. The FanDuel line is closer to minus 200, which I think is a fair price. So a decent little chunk of value. I think if you grab the Mets on DK, I didn't price shop too much. So who knows, you might be able to even find better. Obviously the Mets, I have them with pretty big advantages, very solid favorites in the first two games. If it goes to game 3, I think it's going to be a flip at that point, because I do believe it'll be Bassett versus Snell. Also, very large bullpen edge for the Mets. I think once again, the Pods are kind of similar to the Blue Jays. Their pen is respectable. It's kind of a middle of the pack type of group. It's such a powerful weapon for the Mets to really be able to shorten these games. And I guess a big question is something Josh brought up for sure. It's how far apart are these offenses? The numbers through the season say the Mets are quite a decent bit better than the Pods. I don't think that's probably real. Juan Soto hasn't really been what they hoped so far. It seems likely that these offenses should be closer going forward. That being said, I just think the Mets have too big of an advantage with starting pitching in the first two games, and then having the better bullpen. I do think closer to minus 200 is more of a fair price. So I took the Mets, but it is the Mets. But hey, if you listen to Seth Lugo, he says they're better than the Braves. So, I guess at least some players in there have some confidence.
Yeah, old man Seth Lugo definitely running his mouth a bit. I'm sure he just asked a simple question. He's one of the more boring guys in the history of the league. I don't know why they're quoting him as like bulletin board material, but at any rate, I do agree. Snell is going to be a huge deciding factor when he comes on the mound. If you look at what he's done before the All-Star, really before July 1st, he was brutal. I think he had an ERA close to 6. Since then, he's thrown a ton more innings. He's gotten that down to about 2.4 in his ERA since July 1st. That xFIP at about 2.6. 4 Ks to walk ratio as well. So for every 1 walk. So you got to feel pretty good about him if you're the Pods, which is not quite what I would feel good about for those Mets in game 2, but still think there's a good reason to believe in them in that offense. So either way, that is all the time we have for you guys in this one. Make sure you are liked and subscribed to that page. We're going to be coming back to you guys with MLB content all postseason long. So until we see you next, happy betting.